Welcome back to Inside the Vatican. I'm your host, Colleen Dulle, and as always, I am joined by our veteran Vatican correspondent, Gerard O'Connell. Good morning, Jerry.
Good afternoon from Rome, Colleen, where the temperature has started rising again and where we've had a very busy weekend.
Yeah, we can't catch a break in terms of the news or the heat. It's hot here in Louisiana as well. On Sunday, Pope Leo turned 70. What did he do for his birthday?
Well, it was quite an exciting event in St. Peter's Square because a lot of people came in the square, and there was a Peruvian group which carried a banner wishing him Feliz Cumple. Then there were other banners in Italian wishing him Tanti auguri. I didn't see any one in English.
But the US ambassador to the Holy See did bring him a cake from Portillo's, which is a Chicago place.
Yes, he presented his credentials finally, more than 1 year after the last ambassador had left. On July 8, 2024, Joe Donnelly left.
It's still incredible to me that you know all the dates off the top of your head like that. I have a quick question about this US ambassador because I remember, gosh, a couple weeks ago now, he presented a copy of his credentials to the substitute of the Secretariat of State. This is a high up position in the Vatican's diplomatic wing. But that was read by some as being kind of maybe a snub that he didn't give his credentials directly to the Pope. Some people reading into it that the ambassador Brian Birch had been from a group that was really critical of Pope Francis. I mean, what do you make of that? Is there any truth to that kind of political reading of the delay?
Well, it was misinformation by those who didn't understand how the system works here. It's normal to present to meet the chief of staff, that's the substitute Venezuelan Archbishop Penapata, before he meets the Pope. This is normal procedure. And then, so people thought, and what kind of triggered the reaction was a photo of this was put on the social media, and that's a bit unusual.
Mm.
But he met the Pope on Saturday morning with his wife, his 9 children, I think his sister-in-law and another child, and they brought the Pope this chocolate cake
Mhm.
and a happy birthday. And some of the kids apparently also had written or drawn little happy birthday greetings on cards for him. So
Nice.
it seemed to be, in the midst of all the formality, it was a kind of a friendly moment.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we'll talk later in the show about this really cool concert that was held on Saturday night at the Vatican that you attended. Our listeners will probably have seen clips of it on social media by now with the drone show over St. Peter's Square and everything. But in the first part of our show, we're going to talk about the interview that Pope Leo gave to our colleague Elise Harris at Crux. We mentioned it last week. On Sunday, some excerpts of that interview were published, so we'll talk about what's out now. And we'll keep in mind that her book comes out with probably more details from this interview on Thursday, the 18th, so the day that our listeners are hearing this show. So we probably won't have all of the most up to date headlines that you're seeing in the news right now. But Jerry, let's get started with that first story.
So I'm obviously an American, and I very much feel that I'm American. But I also love very much Peru, the Peruvian people, and so that is a part of who I am.
So let's start where the interview excerpt started, which was about Pope Leo's adjustment to the papacy. Jerry, what stood out to you from what he said?
well, first of all, it was very interesting. He said, "I'm on a learning curve." And then he distinguished 2 parts of the papacy, what he called the pastoral element, and he said it was easy for me to fit into that. Well, obviously, he's been a bishop in a diocese. Now he's in a bigger diocese, obviously, the Diocese of Rome. And but he said what has been more unusual, more difficult, more challenging, he said, but I haven't been overcome. Reminded me a little of the title of your book.
Thanks for
He,
the plug. Struck down, not destroyed.
he said the being a world leader, moral authority in the world. He didn't use those words, but he said that's a different thing. And he said, I've been following current affairs through my life. I've been following. He's one who's kind of follows what's happening on the social media, and he reads the news, and also the same is true here. Since he's become Pope, he's being supplied with synthesis of the news.
Mhm.
And but he said it's another thing. I'm learning how the Holy See for a very long time has been exercising a diplomatic role in the world, and he feels he's on a learning curve, especially on this side of the fence.
Yeah,
So
and to that end, he was asked about the Vatican's role in trying to mediate peace in some conflicts, specifically between Russia and Ukraine. But obviously, the Pope has spoken about Gaza as well and Sudan. Um, but he was asked how realistic it is for the Vatican to be a mediator between Russia and Ukraine right now. And he said that actually he sees it as being more realistic that the Vatican is a voice for peace rather than specifically a mediator, which I thought was kind of interesting and
yes, and
resonates with what we've been reporting on.
I think this is absolutely true that people listen to the Pope's voice. They may not agree with him, and sometimes they publicly disagree, as we saw happen with Pope Francis and
Many
also with
times,
his
yeah.
predecessors.
Mhm.
Both at a certain point, Russia disagreed with him, and Israel several times disagreed with him. And he says, I feel they're listening.
Mm.
And he says that's he said the voice of the successor of Peter means something. He says he's giving voice to also people who can't speak, who are not able to talk for themselves because of the situation they're in. And so he sees that as a significant area. Now, we've noted and we've remarked in the past that while France has kind of tended to name names and say this country is doing that, that country is doing this, Leo has been more reticent in naming, but he puts it in more uh, general terms, saying
Yeah, I
that,
would say, like, moral terms.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it was also interesting to me that he emphasized, like, the Holy See's history of neutrality in conflicts in order to keep dialogue open with different sides. And Jerry, we have some news this morning that the Pope has gotten back in touch with the parish in Gaza. I know he mentioned, I think that was last week, that as he was leaving Castel Gandolfo, that he had gotten in touch with, or tried to get in touch with the parish there in Gaza. But now we have confirmation this morning that he did.
well, he's gone, for a start, he's gone back up to Castle Gandolfo last evening. Remember, we mentioned last week that there was a rumor that he may, since Tuesday's his day off, that on a Monday evening he may well go back to Castle Gandolfo. And in fact, it's happened again this week. He went up
Got it.
last evening, and this morning he phoned Father Romanelli, in the parish priest of the Holy Family parish in Gaza City, which now we know is really in a very difficult situation, because you've got 700,000 people inside in the city, and they're now starting a ground invasion, and they're bombing from the air, and they're having the ground invasion.
And in terms of the parish in Gaza, they are staying, many of them, in defiance of the evacuation order that covers the whole city because a lot of folks who are sheltering at that parish, I think there were like 450 before this ground invasion started. Um, Many of them are too ill, too elderly to leave, or they're young children, and so the priests and the nuns have said, "We're staying no matter what with these people."
Yeah, and they're all staying. And it said on the report we got, the readout, as it were, of what happened, that the Father Romanelli said, we're caring for these people. We have a pharmacy. We also provide food and help to those who are in need. And 700,000 people, and the city is being invaded. This really goes back to World War II, I'm afraid to say. And it's and the Vatican is very concerned. And the readout says the Pope was very concerned. And so he phoned him to see how they were doing and to tell them, I'm close to you and I'm praying for you. And of course, the Vatican has made very clear it thinks this shouldn't have happened. The invasion shouldn't go ahead. And I think next week, when the UN General Assembly starts on the 22nd, Archbishop Gallagher will be traveling to the UN, the Vatican foreign minister will be traveling there, and I think the message will be very clear. But so the Pope, in the interview book with Elise Allen, did not, in the excerpts we've already got, did not touch on that. But I understand in other parts of the interview, which I think we will see on Thursday, the text is only in Spanish at that point, but I'm sure we'll get an English version of it. Apparently, it's touching on this question as well, on the Gaza question, because it's a major concern to all the Christian churches, to all the Muslim world, I think the religious people around the world. The extraordinary thing is the support given by the United States for
Hmm.
this. And you have hostages, some 20 alive. We don't know if they'll come out alive after this. And you have the bodies of perhaps another 28. And even the families of the hostages in Israel are totally against this maneuver, but it's going ahead. So
Yeah.
the Pope phoned this morning to express his concern and to assure them of his prayers. And maybe he will continue phoning like Pope Francis did. I don't know. It's not the first time he's phoned. We don't quite know how many times he's phoned, but we know he's phoned this morning.
Hmm. Jerry, going back to the interview with Elise Allen, Pope Leo reflected on his kind of American identity, which of course will be of interest to our audience. He said he feels American, but he also loves Peru, and he feels that he has this global perspective, not just because of the ancestry work that's been done on his family now and that's been presented to him, where he learned about his roots in Haiti and Africa, all over the world, really, and then also his global perspective from traveling to 50 countries as head of the Augustinians.
Yes, it is very interesting because not in the printout we got of the interview, but actually in the recording, you can hear he said, and the genealogical uh, investigations have discovered that I have African roots, I
Hmm.
have Cuban, Haitian, I have Italian, French, Spanish, the three continents, Colleen.
Jerry, I will say down here in New Orleans in Louisiana, it's all anybody is talking about is having a Creole pope.
And I think this is very interesting because he is no pope in history has had such a diverse genealogy.
Hmm.
And Francis obviously had Italian and Argentinian, but and no pope in history has traveled. He's traveled, we think, to about 50 countries on all continents twice.
Hmm.
Over his when he was superior general of the Augustinians. He was superior for 12 years, from 2001 to 2013, and he traveled to 50 countries twice. So, and that included China and India, the two most populous countries in the world. And he says, but he said, I'm American. He doesn't deny that, but he said, I also am, part of me is Peruvian.
Hmm.
He's spent a third of his life in the United States, just over a third of his life in Europe, 12 years as prior general of the Augustinian order, and I think about 5 studying, and
Hmm.
now
In Rome.
2 years as the head of the Vatican office for bishops. So, and then he has spent over 20 years of his life in Peru.
Yeah. So to that end, he was asked if Peru were to play the US in the World Cup, who would he root for? And he said, probably Peru.
Yes,
But
and
it
I
was
think
interesting. After that, he said, as as Robert Prevost, I'm a Sox fan or whatever, but as the Pope, I support everyone.
Yes, this of course is always a question when the World Cup comes around. But he's very. I think what came across in the interview, Colleen, was his honesty.
Mhm.
He's not trying to be diplomatic, and he's not trying to cover up, and he says what he thinks. And
Yeah.
I think this is in this he's a little like Francis, because Francis said what he thought, and people liked it or didn't like it, but said what they thought. And I think Pope Leo is also being very frank.
Mhm.
He's very measured. He's very more careful, perhaps, in the words he uses his expressions than Francis. But he is. There is this integrity about the man. You know,
Mhm.
I am me. I'm not trying to be somebody else.
Mhm. Well, Jerry,
And
one part of the interview that's gotten a lot of attention where he does speak pretty frankly, were his comments criticizing the size of Elon Musk's pay package. And in it, I thought that kind of while that bit got a lot of headlines around the world, I thought the more interesting part of it was the context that he actually said this in response to a question about polarization and where polarization comes from. So he talked about how, let's see, I have the quote here. He says, what's going on? I think there's a lot of elements that have led to this. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I certainly see the reality in some of the results. The crisis of 2020 and the pandemic certainly had an effect on all this, but I think it began further back. Maybe in some places, the loss of a higher sense of what human life is about would have something to do with that, which has affected people on many levels: the value of human life, of the family, the value of society. If we lose the sense of those values, what matters anymore? And then he goes on, add on top of that a couple of other factors, one of which I think is very significant is the continuously wider gap between the income levels of the working class and the money that the wealthiest receive. For example, CEOs that 60 years ago might have been making 4 to 6 times more than what the workers are receiving. The last figure I saw, it's 600 times more. And then he talks about Elon Musk. But it was interesting to me that he identified that as one of the causes of the polarization in our society.
I think there's no doubt about it, because I see in England and I see in the United States what's triggering so much of the migration in the world.
Hmm.
People are poor, and some in high positions don't want to recognize there is this growing gap between rich and poor. They pretend to tell a big lie that the situation has really improved in these years. The reality is it's got much worse.
Hmm.
And I think this, remember, Prevost is a pope who on election chose the name Leo XIV. And he said specifically, I chose it in relation to Leo XIII. And that was one of the issues about Leo XIII, was touching on, what's the condition of the working people and the whole move of capitalism, etc. And I think we're going to hear a lot more on this, Colleen. And he was very clear. He was saying, basically, he was saying 60 years ago, basically when he was a young 12,
Yeah, when he was growing up.
10 years old, he said, there was a ratio between the top pay in a company and the worker was 6.
Hmm.
Now, 600 and more. And he said, and then he said, and then Elon Musk is a trillion. Now I see he's a trillionaire. He said,
Yeah.
what does this mean? You know, is is this the values? Basically, he's saying, is this really what life is about?
Yeah, he says, "If that is the only thing that has value anymore, then we're in big trouble."
We're in big trouble, and we are in big trouble. And we see it. And we see the tensions now. I see it right across Europe, Colleen, in the different countries, in Britain, in France,
Mhm.
in Germany,
Certainly here in the
etc.
States. Mhm.
Yeah, and you see it, and we don't even talk about Africa. It's not even on the radar of some people.
Mhm.
And the poverty is enormous. People are struggling to reach the end of the week, the end of the month. And you have so many people living, working, surviving in the gig economy. We've
Mhm.
talked about this on the program before. So remember, Colleen, that in the first half of October, that's in less than a month, we will have the first first document from Leo.
Mhm. Yeah, Jerry, we haven't talked about this much on the show, but it's expected to address poverty primarily. And there was a report from Josh McElwee in Reuters that said it's going to be titled Delexit Te, so kind of similar to Delexit Nos, which was Francis's last encyclical.
It's going to touch on the question of poverty, not necessarily from the sociological point of view, but really as church, as followers of Christ, what are we meant to be doing about poverty? Remember, Pope Francis said the poor are at the heart of the gospel. And he established that once a year there would be a Sunday devoted to the poor, the World Day of the Poor. And clearly, here is a new pope, the successor of Francis, as the 267th successor of St. Peter, saying, you know, poverty is our concern. And he has seen it in a very poor area in his diocese in Chiclayo, in Peru. And he knows what poverty is. And I think we're going to have him speaking, maybe different way, different language, but substantially on the same track as Francis, saying, we have to wake the world. He said this about the conflicts, and he's saying it about poverty. We have to waken people to what the reality is, and awaken consciences. I'm sure we will find this in this document, which will come within a month.
Perfect. Yeah. And if our listeners want to read more about what might be coming in that, in terms of kind of the formation of Pope Leo, his socioeconomic vision, I wrote an analysis for Georgetown University's Berkeley Forum that I'll link to that goes into a little bit of that. But speaking of Pope Leo as the immediate successor to Pope Francis, uh, let's talk about what he said about synodality in this interview. Synodality was Pope Francis' kind of signature reform. This was the thing that was the process that he started, that everyone's waiting to see how Leo will bring it forward. In this interview with Elise, Pope Leo talked about synodality as an antidote to polarization. And at the same time, he talked about how there has been some polarization over synodality. There's been some resistance to it within the church, particularly from bishops who feel that their authority might be threatened. What did you make of these comments?
Well, I think it's very interesting what he said because, in fact, the section on synodality was the longest part of ex, the extracts from the interview that we received. He had attended both sessions on synodality, October 2023 and 2024. And he signed off with everybody else on the final document that then became magisterial teaching and that is now in the process of being implemented slowly, more quickly in some places and slower in other places. But he said, we already in Latin America, and he is identified, we were already on this track. And that's first interesting thing. And it takes me back to my interview with now Cardinal Christophe Pierre,
Oh,
who's
why is that?
who said when he came to the United States as nuncio, he said, I was surprised they didn't seem to know what had been happening south of the border, and few of them had
Mm.
read the document on Aparecida, which is really the s- the undersetting for Pope Francis's teaching.
Well, for our listeners, because they probably haven't read Aparecida either, do you want to just very briefly sum up what it meant for the Francis papacy? I realize
Look,
that's a huge question.
Aparecida was the meeting of all the bishops of Latin America and the Caribbean in Aparecida, Brazil, in 2007, uh, which discussed how we are to preach the gospel and how we are to be church in the situation in Latin America today. And they said, this was the church that goes out, reaches out to the poor, also has a place for everybody. Everybody has a voice in the church. It's
Yep.
not
It
just
also deals a lot with lay leadership, lay missionaries going out
absolutely,
and forming
absolutely.
communities of people who read scripture together.
And much of that was reflected in the synod. And so Leo is saying, we're continuing this process. That's what he said on the day of his election when he came out. We've said on the last program, how surprised we were to hear him use the word synodality in his first address to the world, because it is part of how he has been bishop, it's part of how he has been living with his community as church, and he's going to continue. Now, he says some bishops and priests have been afraid it'll take away their authority. He says maybe they're looking at their role from a mistaken perspective.
Mhm. I also thought it was interesting that when he talked about this influence of Latin America and how it had helped him understand Francis and Francis's vision better, he said that we need to carry that on in terms of, quote, "a true prophetic vision for the church today and tomorrow." And I thought his use of the word prophetic there was maybe hinting at more developments to come.
Yes, but remember, Francis said, you know, he believed that this is what the Spirit is asking of the church in the 21st century. He said that this is what the Spirit is saying to the church.
This is what God expects of the church, I believe, is what he
Yeah,
said.
and this is what Leo is saying. I'm on the same wagon as Francis on this. Maybe he will develop new points that weren't thought of before. He says the church is not a democracy. He made very clear. He said democracy is also, not up to the mark in some
Yeah,
places.
he said, look around the world right now, some of them
Yeah,
are in trouble.
yeah, and we don't have to look far. And I think he was very clear that each person, because they're baptized, has something to offer, something to contribute, and is called to do something. And so it's his idea of papacy and his idea of synodality. We are all in it together. As he said when he met the council for the synod in June, and they all came, he came with his notebook to take notes, and they started asking him all kinds of questions. And he said, this is not synodality. I don't intend to be the Lone Ranger. And I think this passage, I think, and I've put it all in the story I wrote for America. It is all there what Leo said about synodality, and I think it merits reflection. I suggest that people go and read what he has said.
Yeah, certainly. Our listeners can find your write up of the interview excerpts that came out at americamagazine.org. They'll also be linked in the description of this episode. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the historic pop concert and drone show held in St. Peter's Square this past weekend. Stay with us.
As opera star Andrea Bocelli sang Amazing Grace, some of Michelangelo's most famous artworks reproduced by 3,000 drones.
Welcome back. Saturday brought the first ever pop concert in St. Peter's Square. It was co directed by Pharrell Williams and Andrea Bocelli, and the show brought together musicians from around the world, including, just to name a few, Jennifer Hudson, John Legend, Angelique Kidjo, Carol G, Teddy Swims, Jelly Roll, the hip hop duo Clips, K pop star Bam Bam, the Italian trio Il Volo, the gospel group Voices of Fire, and the choir of the Diocese of Rome, and a few more. And these musical acts were interspersed with short speeches from Vatican officials and Nobel Peace Prize winners who had participated in the World Meeting on Human Fraternity, which had been held at the Vatican for the previous days. And then also, there was this drone light display which I've just read was the largest in Europe, forming images of Pope Francis, the Pietà, the word joy, and a lot of other images throughout the show. And the whole thing was called Grace for the World. It was meant to be a universal message of human fraternity and hope, paired with both this meeting on human fraternity and also the Jubilee year. So, Jerry, this was a free concert open to the public, and you went, and you had pretty good seats from what I saw on your wife's Instagram. What do you think of the show?
Oh, you should have looked at my Twitter.
I also looked at your Twitter.
Yeah, no, it was really quite an extraordinary. I have covered it, as you know, the Vatican for a long time. Nothing like this has been seen in St. Peter's Square. Nothing. We had a magnificent event for the Jubilee year 2000, where they showed the whole of the creation, the environment on the basilica, and then there was fireworks outside this on the behind by Castle St. Angelo, but nothing like this. You had
Okay, I
here
remember light displays in the past. I think around like Laudato Si, there was a creation one, and yeah,
this St. Peter's Square is a square of emotions,
yeah, yeah, totally.
and I found it really striking. I mean, first of all, the square was packed, and they closed the entrances, and people were right down the side streets and down the Via della Conciliazione. We were told as journalists we had a possibility of getting in early, and we got in early. We were there almost 2 hours in advance, and we had seats, and so that was great. But I was really struck when right at the beginning, Andrea Bocelli sang "Amazing Grace," and then right behind the basilica, this image of Pope Francis appeared. I mean, 4 months earlier, we were there at his funeral in the square. And it really struck, and the crowd erupted into applause. But it was really striking. He appeared over one side of the basilica on the right and then on the left. And I think more than 1,500 drones were involved in that.
3,000.
No, in all 3,000, I think.
Oh, okay.
3,500 drones. And I understand by Elon Musk's brother, Kimball Musk, has been behind it, I understand. At least that's what I've read some places.
Yeah, I also read that he was involved.
But this was such a professional show that's been 2 years in the making. I mean, the coordination of the music, the singing, quite apart from the drones, was really staggering to see what a spectacular event they had produced. And then we had very striking interventions by Mandela's wife, his third wife, Grace Machel, the wife of the former freedom fighter of Mozambique and president, Samora Machel. She was there and she said, we cannot keep silent.
Yeah, I found her speech to be the most powerful.
And then she said, we cannot keep silent in the face of what's happening in Palestine.
Palestine, Sudan, Ukraine, Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Mozambique. We must commit to bringing a just peace everywhere where violence has stripped us of our humanity.
There was applause. And then we had Nadia Murad, the young woman from Iraq who had been the victim of ISIS and who has become very famous. Pope Francis met her many times, and she gave him a book on her experiences and signed it. And these were very striking moments. And there were other quite known people. But the choirs, the Roman diocesan choir. I'd never seen them perform in all these years with such enthusiasm, with such power. And
Mhm.
then you had the voices on fire.
Mhm. This American Black gospel group, oh, that was I loved watching them in the square.
Wonderful. And then, of course, you had the famous Colombian singer Carol G. Did some duets with Andrea Bocelli, and but there were so many all gifted people, and all coming, and the whole message was about human fraternity in a world that's in conflict. So it's a counter message to the dominant one in today's world, and saying, this is what we're working for peace, for human, recognizing that each one is a brother and sister.
Mhm.
We're it's all took root from the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which some translate as siblings all, but
Mhm.
uh, where Pope Francis says, we've got to realize we're all children of God, we're brothers and sisters of each other. But when you see that some people in some nations their lives seem more valuable than people in other nations, it's a message that's very strong and meant to counteract the polarization in the world.
Yeah, and to that end, it was really cool to see people from every continent performing and to hear these messages of hope and fraternity and unity delivered by people from all over the world. I thought that was really, really cool. And then at the same time, although it was a very, like, all-embracing event, there certainly wasn't any, like, religious exclusion, there still was this very kind of religious tone to it where there were a lot of references to, like, us all being children of God. I my favorite performance was Jelly Rolls. I don't really listen to him, I was kind of vaguely aware of who he was, but he did this song called "Hard Fought Hallelujah," which is a Christian song. I don't listen to a lot of Christian music, but I was like, he came out singing that, and I was so moved.
Hallelujah. Oh, oh, oh. 'Cause God, you've been patient. My God, you've been gracious. Faithful, whatever.
It resonated with a lot of what I talk about in the book, like the difficulties of keeping faith. And then Jennifer Hudson came out and sang part of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, like intertwined with that. I loved that part. I thought that it spoke really well to like faith and doubt in a way that doesn't always happen from church structures.
Yes, it was an extraordinary kind of experience. I could not help reflecting. First of all, as I said, we were here 4 months ago for the funeral of Pope Francis, then the election of Leo, is kind of moving from death to resurrection. And then here Francis appears, and then that really took people totally um, by surprise. They expected the Pietà, they expected various other things, the dove of peace, and then, but this really took. And then I was thinking, here in the Basilica, 91 popes are buried. Uh, I wonder what they would be thinking. And then you think we have all this joy and this in extraordinary explosion of goodwill and brotherliness, sisterliness, whatever you wish, however you wish to put it together. And you think that just 100 yards away, St. Peter was crucified upside down, and some of the early Christian. And so I had all these kind of thoughts running through my head that here is somehow the Catholic Church is able to, I don't know, produce so many different emotions, and because you're dealing with 2,000 years of history here.
Mhm. Jerry, you know what I was thinking of? Because I was watching it on TV, so I didn't have, like, the resonance of the place as much as you had being in the square, but it brought me back to watching Francis's Urbi et Orbi during COVID. I it's always really striking when the square is like transformed when it looks a different way. Like you and I are used to seeing what it looks like for big events, canonizations, whatever. But those two moments, this concert and that extraordinary Urbi et Orbi when the Pope came out in the rain and it was dead empty and he had the monstrance and bless the world and there was just like sirens. Those were two times when I've seen it look like it has never looked before. And there was a resonance there too with like the message to the world that the Catholic Church is able to send in a way that other places can't.
Well, it's the gospel. It's the gospel message, and the kind of Francis was saying, we cannot live our lives alone. We're in the one boat, and we have to row together, basically, as he told the Jesuits on the anniversary of the restoration of the order. But people find it difficult to row together. Polarization, as Leo said in the interview, it's what's destroying the world. And he said, synodality is what can help to overcome polarization. Because remember, when we listened to when we followed the synod, they had a place for things you agree on, things you disagree on. And there was a space for finding a way between to come
Right.
together.
What was it? Convergences, divergences, questions, and proposals, something like that.
Yes. But it's this thing that the whole question of synodality is in a way a response not just to the internal problems of the church, but to the wider problems of the world. That
Mhm.
we have to find a way to get out of the polarization, or else we will destroy ourselves.
Well, and maybe to bring us back to one, a lighter note, but two, back to that interview with the Pope. He said at the very beginning that, you know, when he was being asked about what teams he would root for, he was like, I had to learn early on that dialogue was really important, that being able to listen to other people was really important. And in terms of his own home, that meant that since he was a Sox fan and his mom was a Cubs fan, he had to learn to dialogue and get along well with her. Otherwise, he might not get dinner.
Yes, and I think that in a way this concert kind of connected in many ways with the interview, but also with what's coming in his exhortation in October on the poor in the world.
All right, Jerry. That seems like a great place for us to leave it. If our listeners, our viewers want to watch that concert, I believe it's still streaming on Disney Plus. It was also on ABC News Live, so it might be available to stream via them, and also on Hulu. So Disney had the contract for the whole thing, so all these Disney properties have it. But yeah, you can still watch it. And Jerry, I will look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks.
Thank you, and happy watching or happy listening to our readers and audience.
And listeners and viewers. We're trying to make this a video podcast as well now, so stay tuned for that on YouTube if you would like to see me and Jerry talking. And if you want to find our show credits and links to everything we've discussed on the show, all of that is in the description of the YouTube video or the episode description on your favorite podcast app. All right, Jerry, I'll see you next week.